Your overall Task 1 score is based on 4 smaller band scores. Task Achievement is the score based on how well you answer the question. Coherence and Cohesion is based on your organisation and how easy it is to follow your answer. Lexical Resource is the score you get for your vocabulary. And then Grammatical Range and Accuracy is the score you get for grammar. This lesson will show you the specific things that the IELTS examiner is looking for when they are deciding on these 4 band scores. My name is Lara Ryan. I've been an IELTS examiner and an IELTS teacher at the British Council. I have over a decade of experience with the IELTS test, and I am the founder of Complete Test Success. Before we look at task achievement, make sure to use the link in the video description to sign up for my free live feedback lessons. For a high task achievement score, there are 2 basic requirements. You need to respond to the prompts and you need to use the appropriate tone. Let's look at how you respond to the prompts first. So this is what a Task 1 question looks like for general training, and the parts highlighted here are referred to as the prompts. These tell you what to write about in your answer, and you must only write about these 3 things. Now let's look at how your task achievement score will differ depending on how you respond to these 3 prompts. Let's say you asked me how many brothers and sisters I have. If I answered you by saying that we grew up in the countryside, that would be a low score for task achievement because I didn't answer the question. If I said that I have 2, that would be a better score for task achievement. If I replied that I have 1 brother and 1 sister, that would be an even better score for task achievement. If I said that I have 1 brother and 1 sister and they are both older than me, that would bring the task achievement score even higher again. So what that shows you is that firstly, you need to address the question, and secondly, you need to develop it with some extra information. Now, those examples were just to help you understand how task achievement works, but now we will look at some Task 1 writing. So here's the question, and this part at the top just explains the situation. You have returned from a trip abroad to attend a training course for your company. Unfortunately, you have lost the certificate of completion. We will focus on a paragraph responding to this first prompt. Describe how you lost the certificate. Now, task achievement band scores 1 to 3 will be given if the candidate didn't actually write anything or the examiner didn't understand what they'd written. So it makes sense for us to begin with a band 4 example. And this is what a band 4 paragraph would look like. I'm very embarrassed to say that I have lost the certificate which your college awarded me last week. I was astonished to discover this because generally I'm extremely careful with my possessions. In fact, I cannot even recall the last time that I misplaced something of such importance. Now, in that paragraph, the candidate did write about losing the certificate, but they did not respond to the prompt. Because the prompt specifically said, describe how you lost the certificate, that paragraph is completely irrelevant. Now, in every Task 1 question, there will be 3 prompts, and that means that we write 1 paragraph for each of these. If all 3 of the paragraphs do not respond to the prompt in the way we just saw in that example, that would be a band 4 for task achievement. To get a band 5 in task achievement, some of the paragraphs need to be at the band 4 level we just looked at, and some need to be at a band 6 level. So let's see what a band 6 looks like. We will look at another paragraph responding to the first prompt. Unfortunately, I have lost the certificate which your college awarded me because I left it in a cafe at the airport. When I arrived at the airport, I was very thirsty, so after I got through customs, I found a quiet cafe relatively close to my terminal. Normally, everything is very expensive in an airport, but this particular cafe was quite reasonable. At first, this paragraph might seem okay because there is an obvious connection from sentence to sentence. The first one says where they lost the certificate, the second one says why they were there, and the third one gives more information about that place. However, only that first sentence responds to how the certificate was lost, which is what the prompt asked us to do. Because sentence 2 and 3 don't specifically talk about how the certificate was lost, those are completely irrelevant, and that means that we have a paragraph that responds to the prompt but does not develop that response in any way. If all 3 paragraphs were like this, the examiner would give a band 6 for task achievement. So to get a band 7, we need to respond to the prompt in the way we just saw, but you also need to develop that response with some relevant information. Here's an example. Unfortunately, I have lost the certificate which your college awarded me because I left it in a cafe at the airport. I had not realized that my flight was already boarding, and when I heard the announcement on the intercom, I panicked and rushed to the gate. In fact, I even forgot to pay for my water until one of the staff members reminded me as I was leaving. So in this paragraph, we have a direct response to the prompt and development of that response, but the last sentence is still irrelevant because it isn't about losing the certificate. So if all 3 paragraphs in the answer were to this standard, that would be a band 7 for task achievement. To score a band 8, at least one of the paragraphs would be at that band 7 standard, and then at least one of the paragraphs would be at a band 9 level. In that band 7 example, only the final sentence was irrelevant, so let's see how we can fix that and bring it up to a band 9. The band 7 one said, "In fact, I even forgot to pay for my water until one of the staff members reminded me as I was leaving." To bring that up to a band 9, we can say, "The plane had already taken off before I discovered my mistake, which meant I was unable to return to the cafe." So that is a fully developed paragraph, and 3 of those will result in a band 9 for task achievement. However, as I mentioned earlier, there are 2 aspects related to getting a high task achievement score. The first one is responding to the prompts, as we've just looked at, and the second one is having a consistent tone in your answer. What that means is if you're writing to a friend, you will use an informal tone, and if you're writing to anybody else, you will use a formal tone. In this question that we've been looking at, it says, "Write a letter to the principal of the training college." This is why formal language was used in the examples that we've been looking at. What that means is that even if we've responded to those 3 prompts appropriately, we're only getting a high task achievement score if the tone is also appropriate. If a candidate writes a letter with a lot of mistakes with the tone, that is a band 4 for task achievement. Some mistakes will result in a band 5, and even one mistake with the tone will result in a band 6 for task achievement. To get a band 7, 8 or 9, the tone must be perfect from start to finish. So let me show you how formal and informal tone are different. So the question we've been looking at asks us to write a letter to the principal of the training college. But how would this be different if it asked us to write a letter to a friend? What that would mean is that the information we include would be the same, but we would need to write in an informal style. This here is the formal paragraph we already looked at. Now let's go through it sentence by sentence and see how we can make it informal. So for the first sentence, to make it less formal, I can say, "You won't believe it, but I've just lost the certificate I got from the college I went to because I left it in a cafe at the airport." And for the second sentence, "I didn't know that my flight was boarding, but then I heard it announced on the intercom and that made me panic, so I rushed to the gate." And to make the final sentence informal, we will say, "Unfortunately, the plane was already in the air before I figured out what I'd done, so it was too late to go back to the cafe." So what you'll have noticed in that example is that we need to adjust both the vocabulary and the grammar so as to make our tone informal or formal. Because there is so much involved in writing with a formal or an informal tone, I'll go into that in much more detail in the next lesson. Make sure that you don't miss that by subscribing to my channel or liking my page. And that brings us to the second band score known as Coherence and Cohesion. One of the main things here is to organize your answer into paragraphs, and as we already saw, we're going to have one paragraph for each of the 3 prompts in the question. As well as that, don't include information you need for one prompt in a different paragraph. What I mean by that is the paragraph that we looked at was for the first prompt about how you lost the certificate. So you shouldn't include any information about the second prompt, which asks you to say why the certificate was important to you, or about the third prompt, which asks you to explain what you would like him or her to do. Just make sure that you keep all the information separate in the appropriate paragraphs. The next aspect of coherence and cohesion that the examiner will look for is the progression within each paragraph. By this I mean that you don't want to spend the whole paragraph discussing just one piece of information. So let's look at examples of what would be considered poor progression and good progression. So we're looking at the same question again, but this time we will look at the second prompt. Tell him or her why the certificate is important to you. We will look at the poor progression first. This certificate is incredibly important to me as it entitles me to a pay increase. However, I will not be able to apply without the certificate, which means that my salary will remain the same as before I completed the course. The main reason I did the training was for the pay increase, and therefore without the certificate I will not get the most significant benefit of having passed. As you can see here, the candidate has just repeated the idea that the certificate is necessary for the pay increase over and over again. For good progression, the examiner expects some new information in each sentence, so let's look at an example of that. This certificate is incredibly important to me as it entitles me to a pay increase. However, I must submit the document to my finance department for processing before the increase comes to effect. There is no possibility of the accountants overlooking this step as the CEO of our company is very strict about this procedure. As you can see here, there is a new point being made in each sentence, which is what you are expected to do in your answer as well. The next aspect of coherence and cohesion that the examiner is concerned with is the use of cohesive devices. And cohesive devices are just words that indicate to the reader what type of information is coming next. So if you're about to explain something or change topic, or perhaps you're going to shift the focus to another period of time, a cohesive device will tell the reader that that's about to happen and they will follow what you're writing much more easily. Now, it is a requirement that you use these in your answer, but you should not use them in every single sentence. Now, some cohesive devices are suitable for informal language and others are not. So let's have a look at the difference now. This time we'll focus on the final prompt of the question. Explain what you would like him or her to do. Here's the answer. As soon as you have time, I would greatly appreciate it if you could send me a new certificate. As Mrs. Smith was my tutor, she will be able to confirm my completion of the course or any other details that you might need. Moreover, I have included a stamped addressed envelope which you can use to send the document to me. And these words underlined here are the cohesive devices. As this is a formal letter, these are all suitable, but that wouldn't be the case if this was an informal letter. So the first one, as soon as, is too formal for an informal letter. So we would need to say when instead. As is also only suitable for formal letters, so we would need to say because if this letter was informal. Or is suitable for both formal and informal, so we would not need to change that. And moreover is also only suitable for formal writing, so if this was an informal piece of writing, we would need to say also instead. Now, in my upcoming lesson on formal and informal tone, I will be going into more detail about these cohesive devices as well, so make sure you don't miss that. Also, if you're learning a lot or this lesson is helping you, make sure to give me some positive feedback by clicking like on the video. Now, the last aspect of coherence and cohesion is called referencing and substitution. Referencing and substitution are just ways that we avoid repeating vocabulary. Now, let's look at some examples of these. So, in this sentence, I realized that I was late for my flight, so I rushed to the gate to make sure that I didn't miss my flight. We would never say my flight a second time like this. Instead, we would use the pronoun it instead. Now, using pronouns in this way is actually the most important aspect of referencing and substitution. Next, let's look at this sentence. I should have set an alarm to make sure I wasn't late for my flight, and I will definitely set an alarm the next time I'm flying. And here you'll see that the words an alarm have been used unnecessarily a second time. Normally we would just say one on the second instance. And using the word one in this way is another aspect of referencing and substitution. And let's have a look at one more sentence. I realized that I was late for my flight, so I rushed to the gate to make sure that I didn't miss it. And the word I highlighted here isn't actually necessary, so we can just remove it completely. I realized that I was late for my flight, so rushed to the gate to make sure that I didn't miss it. And excluding unnecessary words like this is the last way in which referencing and substitution is done. The third of the 4 band descriptors is referred to as lexical resource, and this assesses the vocabulary range and accuracy in your answer. In Task 1 and Task 2, lexical resource is assessed in the exact same way. That means that if you've already completed my Task 2 lexical resource lesson, you know how this is scored already. But if you have not already completed that lesson, you will find a link for that in the video description. However, I will also give you a brief overview in this lesson. First and foremost is clear communication. If at any point in your answer the examiner cannot understand what you've written because of a vocabulary mistake, that will bring your lexical resource score right down. Now, what happens to a lot of IELTS candidates is they believe they can use less common vocabulary and that will result in a higher lexical resource score. But what happens is the examiner doesn't understand something they've written because of a mistake, and then the lexical resource score is actually lower than the candidate is really capable of. And this is why in your IELTS test, your focus should be clear communication and do not take any risks with the vocabulary that you use. Also, spelling mistakes will affect your score, so be careful with that aspect of your writing as well. And finally, the examiner will expect to see vocabulary that is specific to the topic that you are writing about. For example, this paragraph from earlier was describing a situation in an airport. All of these highlighted words are specifically used when talking about airports, and that is what is meant by topic-specific vocabulary. Now, on test day, if you don't know the topic-specific vocabulary that you need, there's nothing you can do about it. And that's why it is so important that you should be studying and improving your vocabulary every single day. And the final score you get for Task 1 is grammatical range and accuracy, and this is actually the exact same for Task 1 and Task 2 as well. So instead of repeating what you already learned from my Task 2 lesson on grammatical range and accuracy, you can review that with the link in the video description. But once more, I'd like to just go over the basics here in this lesson as well. Now, of course, you'll need to be accurate with your use of tenses, pronouns, articles, punctuation, and everything else as well. Unlike with vocabulary, however, it's good to take some small risks with your grammar. So, for example, you might be able to have 0 grammar mistakes when you write short sentences like these. I had not realized that my flight was already boarding. I heard the announcement on the intercom. I panicked. I rushed to the gate. However, if you write short sentences like these in your answer, that will not result in a high grammatical range and accuracy score. It's best to at least attempt more complex structures like this one. I had not realized that my flight was already boarding, and when I heard the announcement on the intercom, I panicked and rushed to the gate. Even if a longer sentence like this results in some small mistakes, that will get you a higher score than the simple sentences with no mistakes. However, do not push yourself so far that the examiner will not be able to understand what you have written. You need to be realistic and push yourself a little bit, but not so much that you're making mistakes that break down the communication of your writing. So just let me know in the comments if you were already aware how important formal and informal language is for your Task 1 score. You can just comment by saying yes or no.